History is strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
Glad you are here for hour number 3 of a Tuesday morning, which means it is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. Dave Bowman's been with us all day. Headline at BillMick.com, the Super Bowl, a new reason for Liberty 250, which is where Dave takes us as we march toward next July 4th and the 250th anniversary of the founding of this nation. It is an interesting look, and we've kind of led into it with our previous discussions. But Dave, appreciate you and the work that you put into bringing us Dave Does History. And this look, as we look back on our founding as we march toward that 250th anniversary, very valuable lessons here. What do you got for us today, sir?
It was November 19th, 1863. It was at a small town in eastern Pennsylvania, a crossroads where 4 months before, the greatest battle on North American continent in history had taken place. Some 50,000 casualties of various types. And after the battle, many of the fallen had been buried here. And Lincoln, the president, was invited to come and make a, quote, few brief remarks, unquote, at the dedication of the cemetery, honoring those who had fallen. The important thing to keep in mind here is that Lincoln was not the primary speaker. He was not the main draw. There was a man by the name of Everett who was well known for his rhetoric and oratory, to the point, Bill, where people would listen to him speak for 2 hours before Lincoln ever took the stage. It was a different time in history when people we didn't have television and radio, so there you go. Everett's speech involved classical detail. He did an almost epic retelling of the entire campaign and kept people enthralled. And when he was done and sat down, Abraham Lincoln stood up, set his hat down, and spoke for barely 2 minutes, 272 words. Those words, though, have outlasted anything Everett said. Nobody even remembers what Edward Everett had to say that day. Lincoln's words outlasted the smoke of battle. They outlasted even some of the stone monuments that were built at Gettysburg, erected decades after the fight. The opening line echoes, 77 years ago was chosen deliberately by Abraham Lincoln to make 1776 the focal point, the reference point, the actual reason why we're here. He didn't call on 1787, which was the Constitution. Brilliant and enduring though the Constitution is, he instead went back to the very beginning, to the Declaration of Independence. And by tying the present moment of 1863 to that summer of 1776, he was saying that America's true birth was not in the hammering out of laws, the structures of government, but in the declaration of ideals. It was Jefferson's words, not Madison's, that defined what America was enduring and promised to be.
So, Dave, what you're telling me is that Lincoln didn't just know history, but he understood it and its importance to where we were in this country.
There's that, and he's trying to make a point here, which is that the enduring promise of America isn't found in our Constitution. Our Constitution is great. I've spent years studying it. I appreciate it. I love it. But really what America is found in those words written by Jefferson in July of 1776. Lincoln knows this, and he understands the ambiguity of the political and, more importantly, the moral situation involved here in the Civil War. I don't want to spend any time arguing with you about the Civil War. You can call me up the other way. You can email me outside. You can talk states' rights all you want. The Confederacy itself said that the reason it existed was to own slaves, to own other people. Lincoln knows that he has to break through that. He knows that he has to remind us that 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition. What is a proposition? It's a test. The proposition that all men are created equal. This is the enduring promise of the Declaration of Independence. This is the idea that even when we wrote those words, even as Jefferson wrote those words, he knew that they were not being lived up to. But it was a promise that someday maybe we can. There's something deeply forward-looking in Lincoln's phrasing. By calling equality a proposition, he admits that we have not fully lived up to the promise of 1776, not in 1863, and even later on. It was something that we had to aspire to, something that demanded work. It demands sacrifice. It demands vigilance. And of course, we were gathered there on a field, a great battle of that Civil War, testing that proposition as to whether or not we were going to live up to the ideals that we had put down on paper 77 years before. This is the genius of Lincoln's appeal. He was not asking people to fight and die for the technicalities of the Constitution. He's asking them to fight, die, be wounded, for the permanence of an idea that liberty and equality are not negotiable, that they are the birthright of all, and that this government exists of, by, and for the people only to secure those. If the Confederacy succeeds, it would mean that that principle had failed. If the Union prevails, it means that the proposition still lives. So this dedication at Gettysburg becomes more than just a cemetery dedication. If you've ever been to Gettysburg, you know what I'm talking about. You can't walk that field without that feeling. One of the joys of my life was 2 summers ago, getting to take Ben there and to stand where Lincoln delivered those words. And I know that my son doesn't fully understand them yet. But to take him to Washington, D.C., and one of my favorite picture of that entire trip is Ben, who wandered off at the Lincoln Memorial, and he found his way over to where the Gettysburg Address is engraved into the granite of the wall. And he climbs up on the step, and he reaches up with his hands, and he puts his hands on those words. These ideals that Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, and 50 other men were coming up with were not met yet, and they understood that. But they also understood that in order to reach this goal, in order to reach this idea, in order to become a more perfect union, as we will later put it, requires a starting point. You don't end the war in Ukraine in 30 minutes in Alaska. You don't reach perfection as a nation, as a perfect union, at the very beginning. But you have to have a goal to start with. And Lincoln's words remind us that the Declaration is not trapped in 1776. It's not words on an old piece of parchment written by dead old white guys that we should just ignore. The values are timeless. They're meant to outlive the Revolution, to stretch across centuries, to guide generations that Jefferson and Franklin and Adams couldn't even imagine. And that was the thread that Lincoln begins to pull on at Gettysburg. It's why this short little address is still quoted. It's still memorized. Well, it was when I was in school. And it's still studied. And it's why Edward Everett's masterpiece of oratory is utterly forgotten. In that cemetery, among those rows of freshly dug graves, Lincoln made it clear that the founding promise was not about one moment in time. It's about a mission. And that mission was not completed. It was literally under test at that moment, but it was still growing. And of course, in my own lifetime, we've experienced this this same idea that we have to continue to get better at this. We have to continue to rededicate ourselves to the proposition that all men are created equal. Because if every generation doesn't do that, like the rabbis teach, each generation has to come out of Egypt. In the same way, each generation of Americans has to rededicate ourselves to the principle that all men are created equal, and the government of, by, and for the people is instituted for the sole reason to guarantee that. That's the enduring promise of the Declaration of Independence.
And we pick it up when we continue on Bill Mick Live. So Dave, Lincoln goes to Gettysburg. He delivers that short but forever living address, and he challenges the country and says, it's a proposition that all men are created equal. How do we maintain and perpetuate that? How do we reach the goal? And that's pretty much the challenge that was laid out there.
It's a test. And of course, if you see the Civil War in that light, it kind of changes some ways the way you look at that. What we're doing now is we're delving into the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. And if I slip up and call it the Constitution, my apologies, but that's what I'm used to dealing with. So the preamble, of course, is not the introduction, the in Congress, July 4th, 1776. Now we're into that paragraph where Jefferson has taken his pen to paper, his quill to parchment, and he's begun to explain the purpose. Why are we doing it? He begins with those famous words that Lincoln evoked. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We could spend a lot of time talking about the moral ambiguity with Jefferson writing those words, when Jefferson himself recognized the fact that he was not living up to those words. He understood that. But in his own words, I don't know what to do about it, and nobody else does either. How do we change this? Those are the tests that will come later, but we have to start with the goal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is a topic we'll get into in the coming weeks. We've actually already talked about it once before. That's that change that we get into the language. Jefferson was not simply writing a justification for rebellion. He's laying down a set of principles that would outlast the immediate quarrel with King George III. Once that's done, one way or the other, how are we going to live our lives? We are endowed by the Creator with those certain unalienable rights. And it's difficult to underestimate, or it's difficult to overstate, how radical that statement would be considered in the 18th century, and how permanent Jefferson meant it to be. He was saying that the rights didn't come from kings or parliaments or even constitutions. And I would remind you that the Bill of Rights doesn't give you any rights. It simply limits what Congress can do. He said that they come from God, from nature itself. They cannot be granted or withdrawn by men. They are not favors that get doled out or contracts to be negotiated. They're intrinsic, they're universal, and they are permanent. By the time Lincoln stands at Gettysburg, this claim will become the moral compass for the Union's cause. If rights are unalienable, then slavery is not just a political issue, it's a moral monstrosity. It denies the very thing that the nation is founded on. Lincoln used Jefferson's words to make it clear that the Civil War wasn't about holding borders intact. It was about the test, the idea that we believe that all men, it's self-evident that all men are created equal.
As you noted, Dave, this was a struggle as the preamble to the Declaration was being written. It was a struggle during the Civil War, and it would continue to be a struggle for many, many years.
Even into my childhood, and some would argue beyond that. But from Jefferson's foundation, that all men are created equal, flows the often quoted phrase, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, these are not ornamental words. These aren't just flowery language. This is really the heart and soul of the American philosophy of governance. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not freedom, liberty. Life asserts that every individual is entitled to existence itself without fear of arbitrary destruction. Liberty, we've talked about, asserts that each person has the right to self-direction without being shackled by the will of another, particularly a leader. And that pursuit of happiness, boy, that's a phrase. It extends the principle further. It recognizes that flourishing is not something dictated from above, but sought from individuals in their own way. Locke had written, of course, Life, Liberty, and Property, which Jefferson could have gone with very simply, but there's a very specific reason why they chose that phrase, the pursuit of happiness. That phrase, pursuit of happiness, is America in every nutshell you can put it into. That is an American phrase, it's an American idea, and it's an American extension of the idea of just owning property. No, it is an action, which is what America is really about. We've actually talked about this before on Dave Does History here on Bill Mick Live, and we'll probably talk about it again, how that phrase came to be. In Lincoln's time, during the Civil War, the philosophy is being tested. Can a nation tolerate a system that denies life to those deemed property? The Supreme Court had ruled that. It denied liberty to millions held in bondage, and denied even the faint hope of happiness to an entire race of people. Can that be the way that we are? We are engaged here in a test to see whether that government can survive. Lincoln reminded Americans that these truths are self-evident, not selective, and to carve exceptions into them destroys them entirely. The Declaration does not stop with those rights. It gave government its only legitimate purpose, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Believe me, that is an earthquake in political theory in 1775. In 1776, kings believed that they had their power by birthright. They believed in the divine right of kings, that God himself had put them on the throne. Tyrants would claim it by conquest, which of course King George was trying to do. But Jefferson wrote that power only comes from the governed, and only for the purpose of protecting their rights. If you strip away that purpose, government loses its legitimacy. And it's Lincoln reminding us at Gettysburg about this ideal. He's not merely appealing to patriotism. He's not relying on military necessity. He's drawing a line back to those words in 1776. And he's asking that question. Do we believe this is self-evident? And do we believe that government of, by, and for the people is the only legitimate reason for it to exist?
And we pick it up in moments here on WMMB.
Call Bill now, 321-768-1240.
Renewal by Anderson, the hour sponsor. Dave Bowman bringing us Dave Does History, continuing our Liberty 250 series. And Dave, as you said at the outset, and Lincoln saying this is a proposition, it is a test that I think a government faces every day, in all honesty. And can we uphold those standards and live up to those standards?
I don't even think it's a test for the government. I really don't. Of course, I have my own opinions about politicians in general. The real test is for us. Do we hold these truths to be self-evident? And if the answer is no, we get the government we deserve. When Jefferson wrote those words, when he wrote that governments are instituted amongst men, laying their foundations on such principles and organizing their powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect meaning to gain their safety and happiness, he's doing more than just tossing in a poetic flourish. This isn't every word in this, like the Gettysburg Address, every word in this is carefully crafted. That phrase is the capstone of the preamble. It defines what government is for. Not domination, not conquest, not enrichment of a ruling class, but for human flourishing. Safety and happiness are not sentimental words. They're practical goals. It means security from tyranny, from invasion, from arbitrary imprisonment. Happiness, something far broader than just pleasure. It means the conditions under which people could live full lives, cultivate families, pursue their faith, commerce, their education, whatever makes their existence meaningful. That's the vision of the founders. Government's not to be the idol demanding worship, nor a master demanding submission. It's a tool fashioned for a purpose, and like any tool, it has to be judged by its usefulness. Does it secure the rights? Does it secure life? Does it enable liberty? If so, then it's justified. If not, then that government is illegitimate, and it is the right and the duty of the people to throw it off and replace it with something else. This is the forward-looking genius of Jefferson's words. He's writing in a time when kings were thought to be the divinely appointed. He strips away the mystique. He says governments exist only if it serves its people, and even then, only by their consent. By 1863, Lincoln is able to breathe life back into that principle. We've forgotten it. In many ways, we're going to talk later on about how the Declaration of Independence, as important as it is to us today, as important as it was in 1776, kind of lies forgotten for almost 50 years. It just kind of goes away. The Constitution sort of takes over everything. Lincoln is able to breathe back into that. He's worried about the way the war is going, and he has to make the struggle less about borders, less about emancipation. He has to remind people that it's about the vision and whether or not that vision can endure. So he closed the Gettysburg Address with those words, deliberately echoing Jefferson, that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That's why we are here. And we maybe didn't fight the Gettysburg battle this week. Maybe we haven't been through that in years. But each and every day, that's the question, that's the fight that we have. Do we let that government of, by, and for the people perish from the earth, or do we carry on that goal? The modern relevance of the preamble's challenge is very clear to us. The words that Jefferson wrote and that Lincoln reiterated are not relics in a museum. They are a mirror that we have to hold up to ourselves. Do our governments secure rights, or do they trample on them? It's really simple. Do they derive their powers from the consent of the governed, or do they operate on inertia, bureaucracy, and coercion? Do they serve the safety and happiness of the people, or do they serve the interests that are detached from the common good? These are not abstract questions. These are not radical questions. They go to the heart of every policy debate, every election, and every crisis. And yet, how often do we hear those questions asked at, say, a presidential debate? When citizens feel unsafe in their communities, when liberty is compromised in the name of expediency, when the pursuit of happiness is throttled by economic stagnation or cultural decay, then the preamble becomes more than parchment. It becomes a living indictment. Jefferson's words are still the standard by which we measure the Republic's health. Lincoln knew that in 1863. We found it out again in the 1960s, and it's something that we should know now. To this day, that phrase, all men are created equal, it haunts us and it inspires us. For Jefferson's generation, it was revolutionary, but it was imperfectly applied. For Lincoln's, it was a compass pointing towards emancipation and a national rebirth. For us, it continues to press on the issues of equality before the law, opportunity, and dignity. Each generation, every generation of Americans is forced to confront whether we are truly treating that proposition as permanent or whether we're willing to compromise and settle it for half measures. And that's what makes Jefferson's preamble of the Declaration of Independence forward-looking. It sets a standard that cannot be fully met once and for all. It must be pursued anew in each and every generation.
and we will pick it up in 60 seconds. Your calls ahead on Bill Mick Live. Wrapping up a Tuesday, and Dave Does History with Liberty 250 on Bill Mick Live. We get to the phones at 321-768-1240. Line 1, you're up first in this hour. Good morning.
Is that me, Bill?
That is you. Who's this?
Charlie in Merritt Island.
Yeah, Charlie, what's on your mind?
I want to say, Dave, that was the most brilliant soliloquy I have heard in a long time. Bill, you need to make a copy of that and put it on your website, and everyone needs to grab a link, a copy of that, and send it to everyone you know. Bill, you need to send that to every news agency that your channel is a part of.
Hey, Charlie, it will be there shortly after the show under the podcast section, top of the page at BillMick.com. Every hour of every show is done that way, and especially these.
Yeah, that was brilliant, Dave. Absolutely inspired, brilliant. Every kid, that should be taught in every school, mandatory. Our Department of Education, I was thinking just before I tuned in, I was driving along thinking about, we should have things on every wall, in every hallway, in every classroom, in every school, positive messages like what you do today determines your future. Learning to read and write will give you a better life. I mean, all kinds of positive messages. If there's one and only thing a Department of Education is good for, would be to mandate that positive messages like that, and like what Dave just said, that should be read in the halls of Congress. I'm serious.
Charlie, that's well said, and I do appreciate it. I know, Dave, you do as well.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I don't do this to get praise, and I mean, it's all nice and stuff, and I appreciate it. It's just something that I passionately believe, and this goes back to what I talk about with politics. When was the last time you heard any politician in any debate, discussion, press conference asked about what are you doing to preserve and defend liberty? To preserve and defend the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My guess is that the vast majority of politicians don't even know what those words mean.
And don't care to in many cases. That's tough. Hey, I want to go back. We took a call in our second hour. John had called in because he wasn't sure he'd be here in the 8 o'clock hour and wanted to know other references you have used for Western influence on the founding of this country. And obviously, you'd listened to last week's show where we were talking about those things. Easy place for him to find that from you?
There is a link on my page, davedoeshistory.org, which, by the way, will also have this podcast, Charlie, so you can get it there. And you can follow me on iHeartRadio. So all that's there as well. There is a link on the page, davedoeshistory.org, that says recommended books. I have collected an eclectic group of books that I have used for this. Plus, I have spent probably close to $1,000 on this. Shh, don't tell my wife. He specifically asked about a book. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I
didn't get to write it down. It was too long.
A history of Western tradition. Yes, I would highly recommend that. Professor Guizzo, sorry, I screw up his name, is one of my favorite lecturers. I have purchased probably 6 or 7 of his lectures that are available, and he is a very, very knowledgeable and very good speaker. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the book. The book is $80. I don't know that I'm going to be buying that anytime soon, but he has several lectures out there. The Life of Abraham Lincoln, America's Founding Fathers. He has a very good course on making history, how historians interpret stuff, which you've heard, some of which you've heard regurgitated here. So, yeah, I would highly recommend the book. I just don't have $80 to spend on it right now.
I got you. I want to hit you with one other question in the couple minutes we have left, Dave. Had the South won the Civil War and the Confederate States of America fell into existence beside the United States of America, that what was left of them, does either nation survive? And do these principles survive in the now smaller United States?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Militarily, I don't see any way that the South could have won. The only way you win militarily is you wear down the North's willingness to fight. And the North just says, you know what, we're not spending any more money on this. We're done with this, whatever. There isn't going to be a Southern invasion of the North that conquers the North. That's not going to happen. I don't think that either nation survives as they were then. The South still had a moral problem, which was that many of the civilized nations around the world were not real happy about that slavery thing. And when you have a whole bunch of people that are just locked into that, it made things hard.
How do you think it made it different for the North, or would have?
The North, because of the geography of it, I mean, basically the North now extends west across Missouri, south into Arizona to California. I think the North survives, but I don't know, because we gave up on those principles, do we maintain the principles? That's the question you would have to ask. And if you don't maintain those principles, what kind of government do you end up with?
Renewal by Anderson brought you this hour. Dave Bowman brought you the content. And Dave, I appreciate it. Job well done. I can't say it as well as Charlie did, but we appreciate it all, my friend. I look forward to having you back next Tuesday.
See you then.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.